Hi, everybody. My name's Randy Ray. I'm the host of Literate Texan, where we talk about books and literature, highbrow, lowbrow, anywhere in between. We try to focus on good stuff, but we also try to focus on not being snooty about it, right? This month is October, which is also Victober, which is the big event this month, and this is Thursday. So Thursday is Poetry Thursday. The Victorian age was known for its poetry, so I thought maybe I could make a video for beginners to Victorian poetry. So here it is. How to get started with Victorian poetry, or how to read Victorian poems. That's what this video is. And this is not a graduate level seminar by any means about it. It's just for people hoping to get started, okay? A lot of people think that Victorian poetry is really dense and hard to understand. Or maybe they think any kind of poetry is dense and hard to understand. I've got some notes here. I had to take notes beforehand. But you know what? Don't be intimidated by Victorian poetry. It's not as hard as you think. I'm going to start by reading a poem, okay? This poem is called My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, who was known for dramatic monologues. And this is one of the kinds of poems that were popular during the Victorian era, where it was a dramatic monologue. So this will be fun because I get to do a dramatic monologue that I haven't rehearsed. So, My Last Duchess, Ferrara. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fray Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you to sit and look at her? I said. Fray Pandolf, by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I've drawn for you but I, and seemed as if they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus, Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fray Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. Or, paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. Though his fair daughter's self, as I vowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, though a rarity, which claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. Okay, so I love that poem, and I don't know how much of it you followed or not, but basically it's about this duke who's bragging about his last wife who's dead now. And if you read between the lines, it's pretty clear he killed her because he's jealous. Because, you know what? even though she was appreciative of the things that he did for her, she was appreciative of other stuff too. But he just sounds like a jealous madman. And he's showing off this painting of her to a guy who's somehow connected with or helping him get introduced to, his next target, the woman he hopes to marry next. I wonder how that's going to go, huh? Anyway, terrific poem. It's great for Halloween. It's one of my favorite Victorian poems by one of my favorite Victorian poets. And admittedly, I don't have a lot of favorite Victorian poems and poets. I'm more of a Shakespeare guy. Victorian stuff's a little bit different for me. But, one of the opportunities that this channel gives me is an opportunity to learn more about different stuff. And so for me to make a video about how to read Victorian poems, it's an opportunity for me to learn more about how to read Victorian poems. So I don't think that was too hard to follow. But maybe you did. I mean, even if you missed pieces and parts of it, I think you still kind of got the drift there, if you're paying attention. If not, rewind it, listen to it again, okay? So here's my, I've got a numbered list of things to keep in mind when reading Victorian poems. And some of these, I think apply to all poems, and most people miss it. And I didn't get this when I went to high school, but I swore that if I ever got to teach high school again, and I might, I'm looking at it as one of my future careers. I've got the degree for it. I do have an English degree. It's not a graduate degree, but I do have a bachelor's in English literature. But at any rate, one of the things they didn't teach me in high school about poetry and poems was that you should read them aloud. And I mentioned this in another video not long ago. And somebody in the comments said, no, you don't need to read poems aloud. It doesn't make any difference. Well, I beg to differ with that person. That is incorrect. The difference between poetry and prose is that poetry is poetry because of how it sounds. That's what makes it a poem, okay? The rhythm and rhyme. There may or may not be a rhyme to it, but the rhythm certainly matters. Otherwise, it's just prose, okay? It's like it's not a song if it's not set to music and doesn't have verses and choruses, right? So, yeah, the first advice I'm going to give to somebody who's new to reading Victorian poetry is read it aloud, because listening to the rhythm and the rhyming is going to help unlock the meaning of the poem for you, okay? And I want you to keep in mind, too, we're not playing a game of Fargo North decoder here, okay? Poems don't necessarily need to be decoded. They're not written in ciphers. They're written in English. The language is different because they're trying to do more with it. It's elevated in certain ways, but it's written in English. I mean, there weren't any words in that poem that maybe forsooth. I don't know what that means specifically, but I know it's an exclamation. But for the most part, all the words are there and they're in order and they're written in sentences. If you can read a sentence, then you can figure this poem out. You might have to go a little slow, but read it out loud, okay? That's the first thing about Victorian poetry that I've got written in here in my notes. Number 2, it says, look for the form, okay? So poems are written in various forms. For example, most of us know what a haiku is. A haiku is a Japanese poem format that's written, it's always a 3-line poem with a certain number of syllables per line, 5, 7, and 5. That's a haiku. And then everybody knows what a limerick is, more or less, okay? There was an old man from Nantucket, blah, 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 blah. And it's got a specific rhyme scheme and a certain number of syllables per line. And so the form of the poem also helps to unlock the meaning. In Victorian poetry, of course, there are all kinds of Victorian poems, but there are some popular forms, one of which I just showed you or read to you. It was a dramatic monologue, okay? I was in the character of the Duke, whose Duchess had died, and I'm talking to you about the picture on the wall, okay? It's a dramatic monologue. You might see it in a movie or on stage as part of a bigger story, maybe. All right, so that's one form of poem. It might be a dramatic monologue. It might be a narrative poem. A narrative poem is much longer, and it just tells a story. And it's not always much longer, but it's generally longer, okay? Because stories generally are longer, okay? So if it's a narrative poem, that tells you something too, okay? It tells you to try to pay attention to the story and the plot line that's going on. An example of a narrative poem, I think, would be Goblin's Market, which I read here It's by Christina Rossetti, but it's a poem that I read here a few months ago for Horror Mayhem. Love it. It's wonderful. It's a really great story about these goblins. Anyway, find the video. Look for it. Randy Ray Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. You just put that into the YouTube search tool and it'll find that video for you. And definitely worth your time and worth listening to. It's perfect for October, as, in fact, My Last Duchess was. And then the third form of poem that I'm going to tell you to look out for when you're considering Victorian poetry is the sonnet. And we've talked about sonnets on my channel before too, but our discussion of sonnets heretofore has been limited to Shakespearean sonnet or an English sonnet, which, like an Italian sonnet, has 14 lines, but it has a different rhyme scheme and a different layout. In an English sonnet, the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. The final two lines are a rhyming couplet, but those letters indicate which lines rhyme with which lines. And so if you notice, there's naturally falls into three quatrains: A, B, A, B. That's the first quatrain. C, D, C, D. That's the second one. And then the third one, E, F, E, F. That's the third quatrain. And then there's a rhyming couplet at the end. And one of the distinguishing characteristics about any sonnet, not just an English sonnet, is that there's a volta. The volta is where the subject changes a little bit. There's a turn in the argument, okay? So you're presenting a problem or a proposition in the first 8 lines of an English sonnet, the first 2 quatrains. But normally the third quatrain spins it around and says, but, or on the other hand, and then wraps it all up with a rhyming couplet at the end. The more popular version of a sonnet during the Victorian era was the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, which still has 14 lines, but the rhyme scheme is different and the structure is different. And the rhyme scheme is ABBA, 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 ABBA. That's the first 8 lines, okay, which is followed by a sextet, CDE, CDE. That's it. That's the whole thing. And the turn in that one usually comes after the first 8 lines, just like it does in an English sonnet. But it winds up having a different feel to it. And I'm going to read an example of an Italian sonnet here in a little bit, but those are the 3 forms to look for. One of the things about a sonnet on the page that makes it easy to spot is that rhyme scheme, of course. But also, it's 14 lines with 10 syllables in each line. So it generally makes almost a square shape, the text does. Usually it's more of a rectangle, a little bit more of a rectangle, but not a very thin rectangle, a rectangle that's almost a square. So those are the 3 forms of Victorian poetry to kind of be familiar with and look out for. And if you recognize that will help you unlock the meaning of the poem. Because, you'll know if it's a sonnet to look for the turn, to look for the part where the argument spins on its head, And then if it's a dramatic monologue, then you'll know a monologue's it's from one person. You'll know that the narrator is just the one person throughout. And then you also know that a story is a story is a story, which is the case for a narrative poem. You can tell when you're being told a story. So that's going to help you unlock the quote-unquote mysteries of the Victorian sonnet. Let's see, the third thing that I've got written down here is context. Okay, so context clues your report with any kind of language or any kind of reading, okay? But in this case, I'm talking about the larger context of the Victorian era. Okay, so the Victorian era was from, I think I wrote this down here somewhere, from 1837 until 1901. That's when Queen Victoria was Queen of England. So it's a pretty long time. But there was a lot going on during that period, okay? This is the age where science was becoming the new thing. And as science advanced, religion kind of started taking a back seat. And a lot of the things that we used to take on faith turned out to have been untrue or true in a different way than we thought it was. And so there's a tension there between the old ideas and the new ideas that's going on in Victorian literature and indeed in Victorian society of all kinds, in all kinds of arts, but in particular in poems. If you look for that tension between two things, in a Victorian poem, you will often find it, and it will often unlock a greater meaning to the poem for you. Okay, and so I've got an example written down here. I also mentioned in my notes here, that's when Darwin published The Origin of the Species, which was pretty revolutionary in terms of how we thought about things. But here's the poem. This is from Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, who's a Victorian poet that's worth looking into. And it's a long poem, but I only have a couple of lines here. The sea of faith was once too at the full. The sea of faith, the sea, S-E-A, like the ocean. The sea of faith was, in the past, was once too at the full. It also used to be at the full. What's the opposite of faith? Reason, okay? And so this isn't just about the tide coming in and the tide coming out, literally speaking. It's figuratively speaking. So the tide's going back out on faith, and the tide's coming in for reason. But the poet is reminding us, okay, hey, keep in mind, this is the way of things, okay? Things change. And right now we're seeing a change where faith is becoming less important to society and culture, and reason is becoming more important. So look for that. And it won't always be an argument between faith and reason. Obviously, there were other things on Victorians' minds. But they're out there. And I've got some listed here to look for, some specific ones. Let's see here, verses. I thought I had some in my notes here. You know, I didn't used to have to make notes to do this sort of thing. I used to do this stuff completely off the top of my head. But now, okay, so yeah, that tension that we're talking about, we're looking at faith versus reason, which was the one we just talked about, but also love versus duty. Okay, so, an example of this, it's not from a poem, but it's a story. Arthur Conan Doyle had a wife who was deathly ill, and he had a duty to her to be her husband. He was also in love with another woman at the time, but he did not act on that love for that other woman. They were just friends, and he remained friends with her until his wife passed away and he could act on it. That's the kind of question, that's the kind of dilemma that someone during the Victorian age would face. How important is duty compared to love? Nowadays, I think most people would say, hey, if you're in love with someone else and your wife is deathly ill and can't be a wife to you, well, of course you should just go off and find happiness where you can get it. But that was not the case in Victorian England at all, especially not among the cultured or whatever. So look for that sort of thing. Also, progress versus loss. Okay, so yeah, we're seeing progress technologically, but we're also seeing the loss of other things. And we've seen that happen, not just during the Victorian era. And off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of any specific examples during the Victorian era. But if you think for just a little bit about progress versus loss during our era, it's pretty easy to think of things. For example, when we stopped making movies in black and white and made them in color, okay, that was progress. Color movies are cool, man. But we also lost black and white movies. They hardly ever make black and white movies anymore. And a black and white movie has a certain charm to it, a certain, as the French would say, I don't know what. And that's lost to us because people don't make black and white movies anymore. And a lot of people assume that if it's old and in black and white, it's automatically bad just because it's old and in black and white. So that's something else to look for and think about when you're reading Victorian poetry. Let's see what we got here. So I've got another poem. Okay, this one's by Christina Rossetti. And I'm going to recommend a book to you guys right now. If you're interested in learning more about Victorian poetry, I recommend the Dover Thrift edition of English Victorian Poetry, an anthology. It's about 240 pages long. It has about 170 poems in it, but you can get it on your Kindle for just $2.99. That's really unbelievably good price for you can get a really big, detailed, almost comprehensive anthology of Victorian poetry for $50, $60, $70 if you're looking for something in a textbook or something like that. But if you're like me and you're a beginner to it and you just want to get your feet wet and read some of the important stuff then I suggest getting this one. And let me show you what the cover looks like for this one. And it's easy to find. But I'm a big fan of these Dover Thrift editions, especially now that they're available on the Kindle too. You can get this in paper for $6 too, the paperback version. So it's worth thinking about. But anyway, I've got this out because there is a poem in here I'm going to read to you by Christina Rossetti. And we talked about Christina Rossetti just a minute ago because I read Goblin Market earlier this year. But now I'm going to read a sonnet by Christina Rossetti. Okay, and I want you to listen for the tension in this one, the two ideas that might be clashing here. Okay, so listen for that as you listen to this sonnet. If I can find it, here it comes, here it comes. This is called Remember. Okay, and if you haven't heard this before, man, I'm really excited to be your first exposure to it. And if you have heard it before, I hope I do it justice. I know that I won't, but remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you could no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turned to go yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me. You understand it will be late to counsel then or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. Okay, so remember. Okay, so the author, the speaker, she wants the subject of the poem to remember her. Remember me when I'm gone away. She's talking about at some point in the future, she's going to be gone away. And I don't know why she thinks she's going to be gone away before he does. Maybe she's ill. We don't know. But she's gone far away into the silent land. Obviously, that means death. When you can no more hold me by the hand. You can't hold hands with a dead person, not for long. Nor I half turned to go yet turning stay. Yeah, you won't be able to turn and talk to you anymore either. Remember we when there's no more day by day and you tell me about our future that you planned. So yeah, when I'm dead and gone, you're not going to be able to sit there and tell me about this future you've put together for us. But only remember me, you understand it'll be late to cancel then or pray. It's going to be too late then, I'll be gone. But, okay, and this is where the turn comes, the volta, as they call it. It says, yet, and that's how you can tell where it's starting, is the yet or the but or the on the other end. It says, yet, if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruptness leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. So the conflict there, the tension is between remembering her, okay, and grieving and being sad, and forgetting for a while that she's dead and being happy. And she's encouraging him, hey, it's okay if you forget for a while the circumstances of me dying and being gone. If you forget for a while and you can be happy for a little while, then I want to encourage you to do it. Excuse me, I have some medication makes my mouth really dry. So, okay, those are two examples of Victorian poems right there that are fairly short and I think reasonably easy to understand. I don't think those are particularly dense. They shouldn't be too intimidating. But that was Remember by Christina Rossetti. The poem I read earlier in the video was called My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. And I'm going to leave you with another section. I'm not done yet. I'm sorry this video is so long, but I mean, we are covering Victorian poetry. It's a pretty big subject. And like I said, I don't have time to put on a graduate seminar, but I want to give you a decent introduction at least, okay? So I want to give you 7 poets to look out for. And I gave you that book, okay, to look for, the Dover Thrift Edition, that anthology. But, you can certainly find other anthologies. That's just really affordable. But here are the 7 authors or the poets that I'm going to tell you to look for. The first one on my list is Alfred Lord Tennyson. He was poet laureate for the entire country of England for decades, I think. A long time, anyway. But that's a good starting place. He's got a poem called Crossing the Bar that's really good. But I also have The Ideals of the King, Ideals, I-D-Y-L-L-S, of the King, which is a poem that basically tells the tales of King Arthur and his knights, but in poetic form, and it's really great. So yeah, that's one to look for. Alfred Lord Tennyson. Also, Tears, Idle Tears. That's a really wonderful poem by him to look for. Number 2 is Robert Browning. He was considered the master of the dramatic monologue. My Last Duchess is one of his more famous ones, but that falls into that category. 3 on my list is Christina Rossetti. We read Remember, which is the sonnet by her, and then Goblin Market is one that we've read here in the past. Number 4 is Christina Rossetti. Number 5 is Matthew Arnold. Dover Beach is the poem to look out for. That's the famous one. And I read a line or two from that as an example of where you can find some tension between two ideas and unlock a deeper level of meaning to the poem than you might not have seen before. But yeah, Matthew Arnold is worth looking at too. Number 6, Gerard. Ugh. Of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most. Gerard Manley Hopkins was a Jesuit priest, and he did interesting things with rhythm that had never been done before. He broke the rhythmic structure of poems, and so in that respect, he kind of was on the forefront of modern poetry, because a lot of modern poems, don't have any kind of rhyme or rhythm structure to them at all. They're just whatever you want to do goes, which makes me ask, well, isn't that just prose? But anyway, shut up, Randy. You don't have your master's degree in poetry. Number 7 is Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy is probably better known as a novelist, but Thomas Hardy got his feelings so hurt by a review of his novel, one of his final novels, that he gave up writing novels completely and just started writing poems. And so Thomas Hardy is an example of a Victorian poet that you should look at. So there's a list of 7 for you, okay, to go look at further. All right, and I'll go over them again just once. And there's, maybe I'm not going to go over them again. There's Alfred Lord Tennyson, which was the first one we looked at. And then there's Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and I don't know if you noticed or not, but Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning both have the same last name. That's because they were married. She wrote sonnets from the Portuguese, and I think I left her out when I read the list before, so I'm glad I'm doing it again. So number 1, Alfred Lord Tennyson. Number 2, Robert Browning. Number 3, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Number 4, Christina Rossetti, who's just terrific. Number 5, Matthew Arnold. Number 6, Gerard Manley Hopkins. And number 7, Thomas Hardy. Okay, so take a look at all those. And that's what I got for you today, okay? That's how to get started. That's how to read Victorian poetry. That's my introduction. That's how to get started. This is for Victober. It's also for Halloween. It's also for Poetry Thursday, which I'm going to be more active in the future because I'm feeling a lot more interested in poems today. And I want to share what I learned with you guys. But I also want you guys to share with me what you know too, because, I am not some guy coming down from a mountain with a bunch of stuff about literature carved into stone. I'm on this ride with you guys, and we're all learning together. Even though I have a degree in literature, there's so much that I haven't learned yet. So please leave a comment for me. Let me know if you like this video, if there are other poets from the Victorian era that you like that I didn't mention, what you did and didn't like. I want to hear all of it, please. And until next time, stay sexy, folks. And do stay hydrated. It's really important. Now that the weather's cooling off, people are forgetting to stay hydrated, and it's important that you don't.